Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our public speaking workshop for entrepreneurs. We're excited to have you join us for this session. So as we all know, effective communication is the cornerstone to the success of any business owner, whether you're pitching to your investors or you're inspiring your team or you're connecting with your customers, being able to articulate your vision clearly is very important. So before we dive in, I'd like to introduce our esteemed speaker for today, Emanuela Chioke. Some background information about her is she's currently the Chief of Staff at Oze, where she leads the strategy team and drives initiatives across the company. Her experience in sustainable investment, advisory, startup mentorship, and consulting brings a unique perspective to the table. When she's not busy helping shape the future of Oze, you can find her enjoying a good book or catching up on some much needed rest. Emanuela is also especially passionate about empowering entrepreneurs and is excited to share her expertise on public speaking with us all. So let's give her a warm virtual welcome with some emojis in the chat. And Emanuela, over to you, please. Sorry, Emanuela, you're on mute. Sorry, okay.
So much perfect communication. All right, guys, I'm really happy to be here and to spend, I think, the next hour, 30 minutes with you, kind of going through a little bit of my experience with public speaking and just some tools and tricks that I think will be helpful, not just for public speaking, but also crafting a narrative around how you tell the story of your business, whether that be, information that you're sharing with your investors, or you're communicating with your team, or trying to acquire a new user. Okay, so just by a show of thumbs up, can you guys see my screen or no?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. We can go ahead and get started. So in the next hour, we'll be talking through kind of 4 big thematic points: the power of storytelling, knowing how to talk about your business, understanding your audience, and practical tools for public speaking. And one thing I want us to pay attention to is the way that I'm crafting or building this narrative around how we address public speaking is really from 2 points of views. One, from the point of view of you are trying to fundraise or acquire funding that you need to grow your business, and 2, you are trying to acquire new customers. And so just very quickly, let's go over a little bit of some basics, a few terminology that you'll be hearing me kind of talk through in the course of this workshop or this presentation, and just giving you some of the definitions behind that. Public speaking, of course, we already know what public speaking is. The one thing I wanted to point out there is, especially with our new age of technology, public speaking is a little bit broader than the very kind of traditional myopic way in which we look at it, where it's you on a podium and then a stage, right? Public speaking in today's world could look like you're live on Instagram or Facebook or WhatsApp. I don't know if WhatsApp has a live function, right? You are generating real content for your TikTok because you have a message that you want to share with an audience. And so the way in which public speaking is defined or exists continues to expand just as technology allows us to be able to kind of be more effective in the way that we communicate. Storytelling, I think storytelling is a really important part of public speaking or passing on any message, right? On the right, we're seeing this paragraph of, what a message looks like when the story behind that is properly crafted versus what it looks like when it's not, right? So it's one thing to know information, it's another thing to know how to share that information. And storytelling is that tool or that channel that helps you kind of create a framework or a boundary around how to tell that story, just so you're getting the most important points across. you would hear me mention things like resonance, engagement, retention, narrative, and milestones. Narrative, you just heard me kind of use through. And narrative really, just from like a grammatical point of view, is sort of the structure of that story that you're telling. Is that me?
No, Emma, sorry. I've muted them.
Okay, great. So as I was saying earlier, a really important part of kind of public speaking is the storytelling angle of it, right? Because it's more than just a way to share information. It's a tool to help you connect emotionally with your audience and make your message memorable. With public speaking or with passing on any kind of information to any audience, whether that be a digital audience, a massive audience, right? It could be, as we are now on a Zoom call, or it could just be, a one-on-one conversation. There's two things that you need to be able to successfully achieve. One, you need to be able to appeal to their logic, their rationale. And two, you need to be able to appeal to their emotion. And so telling a good story is really a function of finding a balance between emotion and logic, right? What are the things that will necessarily pull at the heartstrings of the person you're listening to? But then again, also, what are the things that are just data and facts and numbers or financials, that is information that is captivating as well. So why do story matters? I think the buildup of everything I've been saying here is really to be able to answer this question around why stories matter, right? I was just saying that storytelling is really a function of finding a balance between emotion and rationale. And so one of the most important reasons why stories exist is to create that emotional connection and be able to resonate with your audience, right? Stories speak to the human experience of another person. So if I'm telling you about, a business I started to start doing record keeping because it was a struggle that I had being able to effectively keep records of my business. And you're hearing that story, and that's also something you can resonate to because that's a challenge you have, right? That's an emotional bond that's been created. You guys now exist in a reality where there is a very factual shared connection by virtue of you're sort of living the same reality, right? Stories make information available. And so part of the reason why it's important to not just dump information, but like craft a story with public speaking is that you want people to remember, right? Engagement and retention are where this comes up, right? If you're telling a story that is kind of very properly curated, right? This is the beginning, this is the build-up, this is the middle, and this is the end. The intentionality around that is what is helping to drive people's engagement and retention, right? So a good rule of thumb with public speaking is if at the end of a presentation or a speech or a live video you've done, or even just kind of like a workshop or a seminar that we're having here, you have absolutely not one person ask a question or have feedback or even be in a state of reflection based on what they've heard, you haven't told a good story, right? Because they haven't been able to engage and there's nothing that they're going to take away from the information that you're sharing. Stories make information available because they also make things really simple. And finally, stories matter because they inspire action, right? If I'm moved enough by what I've heard, this could make me buy a product that you're selling. This could make me invest or give you the money that you need for your business. This could make me kind of even want to work for you, right? This, because it could be the context of now you're trying to kind of pitch your business for me to work there. And so just for business owners like yourself, right? Stories are the bedrock of crafting your business narrative. There are certain things that are important for you to know, and certain frameworks are important for you to think about when you think about what is it that you do as a business owner? Why is it important to me, and also why is it important to the person that's listening. And so in building out that framework, the most important thing is to start with the why, right? Give us the story that has led you to this point. Why did you start this business? What was the problem that you were trying to solve? It's important to begin your story by identifying the core business purpose behind your business. And in a lot of ways, right, that could be, so I was saying earlier that emotional connections are a really important part of storytelling. And the example I gave was, if I'm a business owner who started a record-keeping business because I struggled with record keeping, that's a strong why, right? So any business owner who has that same challenge is immediately piqued by the interest. If I started farming because I was faced with a lot of hunger and I had the kind of tools at my disposal to start a farm, right? That's a very strong why that clearly identifies the purpose behind this business. And sometimes that why and the reason is personal in the sense that this is a reality that you have. Or sometimes it could just be, this is an opportunity that you have identified in the market or in the space that you need, right? You might not have that problem, but you might know a lot of people who have that problem, and you decide, since I now know that this is a problem people face, let me create a solution around that, right? So there's now a strong core purpose behind what it is that you're doing. The next part of this framework is really being able to highlight the journey. So now we have a core purpose behind the business. So now let's talk about the journey itself, like the challenges that you face. What were the things that were difficult for you to overcome? What were some of the things that were important? What are some of those milestones, and what are some of those turning points along the way, right? So, for example, let's say you started a farm, like the example I was giving earlier, and you started farming tomato because that was what you needed. But as a farmer now, you're starting to realize the realities of tomato farming, and maybe this is really difficult because it needs a certain type of insecticide that is really expensive, or it needs a very particular type of fertilizer that you don't have access to. But then you're also realizing that there's other crops that you could grow on your farm, right? So that's a pivotal moment, that's a milestone, and that's a challenge that you've overcome, because the first part of your business was you realizing that you were struggling with something, and now you've been able to pivot into doing something else. So those are sort of the things that are important to highlight. And kind of the last part of this framework is to end with impact. So this really just means showing how your business has made a difference. And there's a lot of ways this can be done, right? The most effective way to do this is through success stories, right? So your success story as a farmer is now you can feed not just yourself, but your community, and you're able to make money from it, right? Your success story as a business who started a bookkeeping software can be, other businesses no longer have this challenge now because there's now a tool that allows them to do this thing and do it effectively. And it is helping them to keep good records that is allowing them to use that information to make decisions about the business, right? So the bottom line here is that the stories are foundations of your business narrative and providing the structure and substance that define who you are and what you stand for. These things give you context and bring your values to life and illustrate the journey that you've led. And so right up till now, I think I've been talking a lot about, the framework in which you tell your story. This is the beginning, this is the middle, and this is the end, right? But even in those different categories of beginning, middle, and end of telling your story, there's certain tools and tricks that are really helpful in each of those different categories, right? So when you're talking about business, clarity is really important, right? Your ability to articulate what you do, who you serve, and how you solve a problem in a very clear and engaging way can set you apart from people in your industry who might struggle to do the same thing. And so here we're going to talk about something called an elevator pitch. and talk about how to tailor your message to different audiences, ensuring that your business story is heard and is understood, right? So the most important things in telling your story about your business or your pitch, right? Because the story of your business is your pitch, is clarity, relevance, and engagement. Engagement has come up before and is coming up again now. And clarity is important, right? Because you don't have all the time in the world, right? The idea behind an elevator pitch is that you should be able to tell your story in the amount of time it takes you to kind of do an elevator ride with someone. That could be like 30 seconds to, depending on how tall the building, maybe 45 seconds. But essentially, you have less than a minute to tell a convincing story about your business, what it is, why it's important to you, and why it should be important to the person that's listening. And this is where clarity becomes really important, because you need to be able to have a really good understanding of your business purpose in such a way that you can tell me what it is in one line, right? If we use the example of bookkeeping, right? I started a bookkeeping app to keep better records because I wasn't able to. Can you guys hear me? Winnie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I had a weird sound, so I thought I lost you guys. Okay. So I was saying, right, so with the elevator pitch, the example of bookkeeping, right? If you have 30 seconds to tell people what their business is, right? You can start by defining the purpose. And these things shouldn't be longer than 2 lines. I have a bookkeeping app that allows businesses to keep good records on an app to use that decision to make information. It's very clear, it's very concise, it tells you exactly what it is, right? And sometimes, you might have to give a little bit more context around not just what the thing is, but like why you do it. But the key point here is the conciseness of the message, and the clarity of it. And so focus on like a few important points that highlight the business strengths and things that make you different, right? So if you use the bookkeeping example still, we could go specifically into talking about the features. It allows you to record sales and expenses. It allows you to manage your inventory, and it gives you business analytics to help you make better decisions, right? So sometimes thinking in bullet points like that are a good way to kind of keep that clarity and make sure that you're not kind of rambling. The second thing that's important is to craft your message, and crafting your message is also kind of crafting your brand, who you are, right? Introduce your business, your name, your mission, and the problem that it solves. Describe very clearly the products or services that you offer and how it addresses customer needs. And then the next thing you should think about is why it matters. So a good exercise for you guys to work on at the end of this workshop, or maybe over the weekend or later in your day, is to take these 3 bullet points, right? Who you are, what is your business name, what is its mission, or what is the problem that it solves, as one kind of category, and bullet point out your name, your mission, and the problem that you solve, right? In the second category, what is the product that you're offering? Again, using bullet points is a good way to help you think very clearly and concisely. So kind of just bullet point out what are your product offerings. And the third category here would be looking at why it matters, and bullet point out again why your business matters to an end user. And like, you won't always get it right the first time, and sometimes the first experience, you might ramble a little bit, and that's fine, right? But the important thing is to kind of keep being in that practice of speaking about your business concisely, to kind of get to that really sweet spot of, okay, now I clearly understand who I am, I clearly understand what my business offers, and I clearly understand why it matters. So I think that's a really good thing. That's a really good exercise to try if you have the time. Not if, I think as you should absolutely try to do that because it would really kind of help you with the message crafting part of this. In as much as crafting your message is great, it's also important to be able to tailor your message to an audience, right? At the end of the day, with public speaking, in whatever form that it takes, you have one objective, and that objective is to get from point A to point B in this diagram that we're looking at without losing any context. What that means is the value of your business, the way that you know your business in your head and the way that you're talking about it should be the same way that I receive it, right? Because a lot of times you might know something, but you don't know how to talk about it. And that becomes evident, so that becomes true when the person that you're listening to, the person who's listening to you doesn't understand what you're saying, or is struggling to understand what you're saying, or has so many follow-up questions to things that you feel like you already mentioned or you already talked about, but they're just not grasping. And so when you find yourselves in those kind of situations, that's when it becomes really clear that your message and the way that you're talking about your business isn't receptive to the audience. And there's certain things that are helpful to make sure that you're tailoring your message to the audience. One is using relevant language. There's times where, if your business is a little bit more specialized and you're talking to somebody or a group of people who understand that industry or in the same business, like you can use sort of the very technical terms and they can follow on. But then there's times where you're talking to an audience who have no idea what you're talking about. They don't know anything about your business, right? And so in those types of situations, it's always best to keep your language very simple, right? So if you use the example of a farmer, for instance, who is growing tomatoes in his farm, right? If he's talking to other tomato farmers about his business, he has the luxury of going into detail about the different farming mechanisms, the different tools he uses, the different types of fertilizers and the different harvesting methods, going into very kind of specific, almost scientific ways to talk about this. But if you're talking to somebody who has never farmed in his life, has never actually been to a farm, the way you would talk about their business is also very different because you can't use a lot of that specialized language. Otherwise, they don't know what you're talking about. They don't have the context that you have to be able to follow that conversation. Another thing that's helpful is to talk about benefits, right? So this becomes particularly helpful when you're trying to pitch your business to a potential customer or somebody who you want to have buy your product or use your product or whatever it is that you're selling. It's important to highlight why it is important to them as opposed to why it is important to you. Because that way, not only are you showing empathy, you are showing that you have a very clear understanding of what their needs are as individuals or as an end user to be able to solve a problem that they have. And another thing that is really helpful as well is when you're talking about your business and you're tailoring your message to a specific audience is to use examples. So you can use a case study. You can use testimonials. Testimonials are success stories. You could talk about somebody who has used your product and has a really good experience with it. And now that person is thriving because of it, right? So any opportunity to show how your business has benefited somebody else is a good way to provide tailored examples there. Right. So we've been talking a lot about tailoring your message to the audience. And so one of the most important things in public speaking is to know your audience, right? Like I was saying earlier, who are they? What are their needs and pain points? Because by understanding who you're speaking to, you know how to address the challenges that are most important to them. And not only does this help you connect on a deeper level, it also increases the chances that your message will inspire an action, which could be to give you money for your business or to buy your product. And so some of the things that are helpful for you to kind of know your audience better is to do a little bit of research to identify the specific challenges and interests of the audience. And sometimes you have the opportunity to do this and sometimes you don't, right? So let's use an example of you meet somebody at a workshop that you go to in person, and you start talking to this person, and you want to see, you have the opportunity to convert this person into one of your clients or somebody who buys your products because they are showing interest in the conversation with you. So a way to get this information in that conversation is to start asking about them, kind of very specific questions around what are some of the challenges that they face, right? There's nothing wrong with point blank asking that kind of question. You can ask questions around, okay, well, how have you tried to solve this before? Has it helped? Why hasn't it helped? Right. So asking some of these a little bit of invasive questions are exactly what you need to be able to understand what that person's primary challenge is and how you can help them solve that challenge. Another thing I mentioned this earlier is to use relevant language, right? So adapting your language and terminology to match the understanding of the crowd that you're speaking to. And adapting presentation style is also very important. So for example, now, if we were having this workshop in person, I might not have used an actual presentation slide, right? The presentation could have been a little bit more conversational because this sort of a topic is something that requires conversation, requires a little bit of back and forth, and requires a little bit of role playing so people can actually see in action how this plays out, right? And so these are some of the certain nuances to pay attention to, right? Depending on the size of the crowd, you might even decide, let's say if you're giving a speech, right, depending on the size of the crowd, you might even decide you want to change the way the seats are arranged because you want people to be a little bit more engaged in the conversation and play an active role in it, right? If this was in an online meeting, you could decide, actually, you know what, maybe we should do a cameras on meeting because you want people to pay attention and to be a little bit more engaged and present as opposed to something that's videos off, right? So some of these nuances are a good way to kind of know your audience a little bit better and adapt the way that you talk to them to fit the crowd that you're speaking with. Another thing that's super helpful is visuals for impact. So incorporating relevant images or infographics or charts, if you're trying to be a little bit more complex, to evoke emotion, to help people simplify things that seem a little bit difficult and to make your message more memorable and engaging. So let me give you a really good example. If we go back a few slides into this infographic, what we're seeing here in this two women is person A is sending a message to person B. And what is happening is the person B is hearing exactly what person A is saying, right? So sometimes the picture does tell 1,000 words because writing all of this or talking through all of this is great, but actually being able to show people what that looks like is even better because now there is a picture, there's an actual image or an infographic that is stored in their head in such a way that even if they don't remember anything they say, people would always remember a picture. Okay. And the last thing, which is a really important thing to note, is with kind of knowing your audience and tailoring your message to your audience, is to anticipate that you're going to get questions and concerns. So, or feedback, right? So I appreciate that people are going to want to respond to all of the information that you have given them. And so you've not done a really good job if you've put together a presentation or a workshop or anything to pass on to an audience, whether that be one person, whether that be 1,000 people, and you haven't taken into consideration that people will ask questions or that people will have things to say about what you've said. Why does this internet keep tripping off? And so And this is important, right? Because it demonstrates a sense of understanding, right? People being able to give you feedback or people being able to engage in that way really shows that they were paying attention and they understood the objective of your message and are interested, are even more likely to take the information that you've given them and use it in their everyday lives. And so it's important to anticipate that and prepare for those questions ahead of time. And to be very honest with you guys, right, public speaking in whatever form that you do it is a little bit scary and a little bit jarring. And people always try to shy away from it because nobody likes that level of tension, to have to present something because in your head it has to be so perfect. And if it's not perfect, the whole experience is ruined. And that's true sometimes, but that's not always true. One thing that's important to know is that you don't always get it right, and that's okay, right? Practice is so important. I was going to say nobody is born a perfect public speaker, but that's a lie. So people, it actually does come very naturally to them, and good for them. I am not one of these people. And so practice does make perfect. The more times you do it, the easier it gets for you, and the more comfortable and confident you become in being able to do that. Another thing that's really helpful in getting comfortable with public speaking is kind of body language and voice control. I like to do this thing, and I'm doing it right now on the call, where I pick a point of focus, right? So in a Zoom meeting, it could just be one person. Raymond, I've been using you as my point of focus the whole time, because that's what I need to get through this, right? If you're in an actual audience, it could be finding one person in the crowd or just one point of perspective in the crowd to focus on, if that's what you need to be able to get through it. Sometimes you get really nervous, and that's fine, right? There's nothing wrong in being nervous. Nerves are a very normal thing. And the more you practice it, the less nervous you become, because it just starts to feel more jarring. And oftentimes you can tell when people are nervous because you can hear the nerves in their voice. Sometimes their voice is shaky, and that's fine, right? Public speaking is a very anxiety-inducing thing to do, and it's one of those things where practicing or doing it often is the only thing that kind of helps you push through the anxiety. Another thing that is helpful sometimes is to use humor to kind of break the tension. So I'll give you a very real life example of something that did happen to me. This is a few years ago. I had to give a presentation to somewhere between 100 and 150 people. And it was in person, I was on a stage, the audience was packed full. And so they called my name up and I was going up to the stage and I tripped on the stage and I fell like flat on the floor, like my forehead hits the stage ground. And I could hear the entire audience just go really pin drop silence. And it was, in a way, it felt horrible because I was really, really nervous going up and then now I'm falling. And then I got up and I just laughed at myself. And the audience laughed with me too. And being able to use humor in that context actually broke a lot of the tension to make the experience less anxiety-inducing than it would have felt for me. Another thing that is helpful to think about in public speaking is to humanize the audience, because sometimes you feel like, especially when the audience is larger, this tends to happen when the audience is larger, you forget that these are people just like you and they get nervous just like you. And there's nothing that you're going through in this moment of trying to connect with them that isn't something that they have experienced at some point in their life. And so when you're able to humanize them in that way and see yourself in them, it actually helps you break a little bit of that tension and feel a little less frightened or afraid to be able to just stand on that stage or give that workshop and say what it is that you have to say. Another thing to know is, at the end of the day, the worst thing that can happen is that they're not interested or they tell you no, which in the grand scheme of things is not the worst thing in the world, right? Especially because that non-positive feedback can be very reaffirming. So if we use the example of somebody who is trying to acquire a new customer, and you've done everything you can to tailor your message to them, you have said everything you feel like they want to hear, you have made sure that that they engage and they're asking questions, and they're still not interested. That's fine. I think a good way to end those types of conversations is, if they're open to it, is to inquire. Okay, so just ask why. Why, what is it that is, like, I guess maybe not asking why did you say no is a very difficult question to ask, but subtle things like, what would I have said to have made you say yes? What have you heard about my business that doesn't feel like the solution for you in this point in time for you to have said no to being able to acquire this? And so I often find that sometimes that no feedback is a little bit more helpful for me, because it allows me to go back and refine, one, the way that I tell the story, or even two, sometimes the way that I build my business, because maybe sometimes the product that you're bringing to market is not necessarily what people need. And so this feedback you get from people telling you no, they're not interested, and you kind of pushing back on that and asking, what would have made you interested? Why aren't you interested? Are things that are helpful to refine your story and your business as a whole. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Do you have any questions for me? Concerns, feedback?
Hi, any questions?
Uche, you have a question, your hand's up. Oh,
Yes, greetings everyone.
hello.
Thank you for your time, and it was quite insightful as I am getting into much more public speaking these days. So yeah, my question would be, how do you practice to make perfect? It's one thing to talk to yourself in the mirror in your bathroom, with yourself as the audience. And it's another thing to actually be in front of 500 people or 150 people. So what are some good ways you recommend, to practice? Thank you.
That's a really good question, Uche. Can I ask a little bit more? So what is the context in which you're going to more public speaking?
So things like panel discussions, keynote speeches, that sort of thing. I'm in the blockchain space, so I'm finding that these days, we're getting to the adoption stage. We're getting past the reject it stage. Now we're sort of like, people are thinking, okay, what is this thing? It's not such a scam anymore. So I'm having to do a lot of trainings and, educating, speaking with different stakeholders and actors, potential actors in the space, that sort of thing. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the easiest way or the most convenient way to do that is to actually leverage people around you, right? There's nothing wrong in pulling a group of your friends and saying, you know what, I'm going to pitch my business to you. Can you listen to this? Right? I think another thing that is helpful, or that I have found helpful, is in going for panel discussions. When I'm not on the panel, I always make the effort to ask questions. Towards the end, there's always sort of that one-on-one where, you raise your hand and you have to ask questions, because that helps me break a little bit more of the tension of building the confidence to do that. Another thing that's helpful is, I guess, depending on where you're based, there actually are like professional groups, like professional public speaking groups, that convene people together really just for the core purpose of getting people comfortable telling their story or talking through their brand very often.
Okay, thank you. And, does it ever go away? Because even now, I can tell that my voice is shaky, but if I was probably on a one-on-one call with you, my voice would be totally different. So I'm wondering why that is. I can notice it, so it puts me in a frame of mind where I'm like, oh goodness, um,
I promise you that it doesn't always go away. Like, I mean, if it helps you, I couldn't tell that your voice was breaking. And so sometimes I think it lives a little bit in our heads, right? The fear that we're kind of manifesting, like the fear that we're feeling, we're starting to like kind of manifest that outwardly, and it doesn't always show. You will always feel nervous. In my experience, I feel like I've never been in a situation where I've had to public speak and I wasn't kind of like just anxiety ridden. But the more often you do it, the reality is that you would still feel that anxiety, it just doesn't show like to the people who are listening to you, if that makes any sense.
Thank you so much. That's excellent feedback. So, it's all in my head, it's not translating to people. Thank you. That's very important for me to know. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
You're getting some fans in the chat, so
Yeah, I was gonna say, Uche, you have fans in the chat. Leonard is saying that your voice is very calm and executive, and you have a fantastic radio voice. Okay. Raymond, your hand has been up, and then Florence. Raymond, I want to thank you for being my point of focus the entire presentation. It was extremely helpful.
Thank you for a very good presentation, I understand that. But I have two questions.
Okay.
One is to regards to the body language. So what is the positive body language as a public speaker? And the second question.
Okay, sorry, go for your second question.
My second question is, if you have a presentation and no one wants to ask question about what you have presented, is it because you are good enough or because they are not interested?
Okay. Let me answer the first question first. The body positive, I guess, sort of stances. I find that they're a little different depending on whether or not you're sitting and making a presentation versus if you're standing. But one of the things that is really helpful is to maintain poses that, even if you don't feel it in the moment, exude confidence, right? So sitting up straight or standing up straight. If you're at a stage and there's a podium, it kind of helps to not be fidgeting with your hands a little, right? If you can put them on whatever is the table or whatever it is that they have available for you on the stage. So sorry, I was reading comments, right? So things that help you kind of exude a little bit of the confidence are that you want to be able to portray things that I would consider body positive stances. So with your second question, you know what, sometimes it's a little bit of both. But I tend to find that sometimes it's a little bit more that people aren't engaged. Because even if they don't have questions to ask you about what you have said, or, if they have clarifying questions, sometimes people just like, if they're really engaged, you'll find people just raise up their hand because they want to tell you, oh, that was a really good presentation and I found that really helpful. If it's a Zoom meeting where no one's asking questions, it also helps to kind of look at the chats, right? So in my experience, I found that if there's zero engagement, whether that be like passive engagement in, leaving comments in the chat or asking questions, or even just raising up their hand to say that I'm really enjoying this, it is because more people were not engaged in what you were saying. Okay, Florence and then Samson. Winnie, can you help me check to see that I'm not missing anybody's hands, because I have like
yes, you're on point.
Okay.
Okay, this is Florence. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's to help our brother who wanted to know how to practice.
Okay.
And I'll suggest that if he could volunteer to work with children, as he engages them you have the confidence of speaking to crowds. And so that's one thing I can suggest to him. If he's in a church, he should volunteer to be with the children's service. If he's not, he could have engagements with students where he could present topics of interest to students. And as he does that, his confidence level will be enforced, and he can now stand in front of adults and then see everybody just like himself and confidently deliver. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. Thank you so much. That's actually really great feedback, because children or young people tend to be the harshest critics. So Uche, if you're still on the call, yes, this is where Florence's advice for you. Okay.
Thank you.
Samson and then Deji.
All right, so this is Samson. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So this is in connection with the question and answers. So when you are having that time and then someone asks you a question which is very difficult to answer. Yes, so I believe you have experience, so you may have come across something like that. So how do you normally handle such an issue when someone asks a question which you yourself, even though it is connected to what you discuss, it is somehow difficult to answer? How do you deal with it?
So there's a few ways to handle this, and that's actually a really good question. Sometimes, I think in my experience, what I've done is I repeat the question to myself, because I want to make sure that the problem is not that the question was long and complicated and I don't understand, or that is actually a really difficult question for me that I don't understand. It also is really helpful if you have someone, if you have someone on your team or someone who has a little bit more expertise in that specific topic you're talking about, to kind of just pass that on to them. If you're in a situation where that's not possible, honestly, Samson, the best course of action is to not lie, right? So don't try to pass off information that is incorrect or that you're not sure of, because you just need to fill the gap and say something. It's fine to say, you know what, actually, right now in this moment, I can't give you that off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to follow up with you and give you an answer to this question. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so that's actually helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay. Deji.
Okay, thank you, Oze. I don't know whether I pronounced that correctly.
You did, yes.
So I think I'm a good writer because of my journalism background. But recently I've begun to have interest in public speaking. But I found out that I need to improve my pitch, my voice, intonation, and all of that. I don't know whether you have any suggestion that will make me to improve in that regard. Thank you.
When you say improve your pitch, what do you mean?
Voice, how would I put it now?
Change your voice.
The intonation, yeah, the intonation and all of that, yes.
It's an interesting question. I think so. I have a few questions for you though. Like, why do you feel like you want to change your intonation? Like you don't,
it's not as if I'm changing my intonation, but sometimes I'm not satisfied with
the way that
how
you
will I
sound?
call it now? Yes.
And is that because you don't, I want to make sure that the issue you're having is that you don't, it's not that you don't like your accent and you want to change the accent, which
If I want to improve my accent, that's just
your
the
accent.
drive.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Well, if it helps you, Deji, as we've been talking, I have been able to understand everything that you're saying, and I don't think that you need to change your accent to be heard. I think in terms of intonation, like the one thing that could be helpful, and this is kind of just general advice, not specific for you, is right, pronouncing words like fully, right? So if you're a journalist, it means you do a lot of reading. And so sometimes reading out loud so that you're actually able to pronounce every single one of those words is a good way to kind of just practice like speech and grammar and like right intonation. And also like using cadence when you speak. So sometimes, especially because of fear, people tend to try to kind of rush through and say everything very quickly, which is something you shouldn't do because that's when it becomes difficult for people to understand what you're saying or to follow you. So using actually your natural cadence and like taking time to breathe in between words or in between sentences is a good way, is a good kind of habits to imbibe as you go into a little bit more public speaking. And in one thing, and I guess this is, it's neither here nor there, right? Because it works for some people and it doesn't work for some others. So personally, I tend to be more gestured with my speaking. So I use my hands a lot more when I'm speaking. And I also find that helps me sort of regulate the cadence of like my breathing, like when to stop and like when to continue. Does that answer your question? But if your issue is your accent, AJ, I don't think that that's something you should worry about, right? Because we've been talking and I'm very clearly understand everything that you're saying.
Thank you. Interesting. I got some points from what you said. Thank you so much.
Okay. Zainab and then Florence again.
Okay, thank you very much. I was thinking of delving into public speaking because I want to be a content creator where I face the camera and say a lot of things, pass a lot of information. But I noticed that once I face the camera, it's as if I don't know what I want to talk about again. It just vanished. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what to say, and I turn off the camera. And another thing is the way I like myself, how I look in person, looking at the camera, there's a way the camera tends to, your left side is your right side is your left side. I don't know how it works. But all of a sudden, it begins to look like where you're trying to talk is going to another side and it's not looking good. And I'm wondering, is there any exercise that we have to do for the face or something, And my last question would be, I want to believe that me delving into public speaking is going to help because sometimes the way I speak, growing up, I used to have a lot of people tell me, "Oh, I love the way you speak. I love your accent," and I thought I could use that way to move into the world of becoming a presenter or something. But till today, I've not found the courage. I've not been able to do anything. The goals I want to pursue, I've not been able to do anything just because I am scared. I don't know how I look. I don't know, want to look funny. I want to look serious. It's not just working for me. So my last question, like I said, is public speaking. Will it really help me? And if it will, the crowd, where can I go, learn, where can I go to be with people who are into this public speaking field? Do I have to go to parties or do I have to go for events to be able to do all that? So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zainab. Those are really good questions. And I also want to like applaud you for like the honesty of just saying, I want to do this, but I'm very afraid to do this, right? Because a lot of people feel that and don't actually say that. So with the fear, I can promise you that there will never come a point where, you have shaking off the fear, right? There's never that buildup of, okay, I've studied this for so long and I know this so well, or I've been practicing every day for the past 365 days and I'm no longer afraid. The reality is that's probably not going to happen, right? It's one of those things where sometimes if you might have heard this before or maybe not, right? Be afraid, but then still do it afraid, right? Because you can't necessarily circumvent that fear. you kind of have to like push through the fear, right? And there are like professional organizations off the top of my head, I can't remember, but I can do some research and share with Winnie, and she can, share this with everyone who attended this conference, where you can actually go and practice public speaking. And people go there specifically for that reason. Florence gave you a really good practical example earlier of using children, because children are really, really harsh critics, right? Leveraging your church, right? Any opportunity to kind of speak is something you should take, irrespective of the context, because it is the only thing that would help you is building the habit of doing it more often, right? It might make you less afraid, or it might help you hide the fear more. But every now and then, even if you're a pro at it, right, there might be days where you've actually just had a bad day, you just don't feel prepared, and you will still be afraid to do it. With regards to the first question, what could be helpful is using cards, right? So you probably have like a whole, camera setup, or even if you're using your laptop, right? If you're using your laptop, you can have sticky note points literally on your laptop around the camera. And so you're reading off a script, right? There's no rule that says you have to memorize everything in your head, and you have to know it from your head and speak from your head, right? Because even journalists and sometimes people give speeches are reading a teleprompter, right? There's actually cards for them to read, and so they are reading. It's just you can't see it because the cards are sort of right behind the camera. So that is something that could be really helpful for you, is just leveraging cards or sticky notes to actually have the things that you're going to say as you're saying them. And regards to your second question, which is the whole, finding the right angle and all of that, honestly, that is even something I still struggle with. But, two things that are helpful with regards to doing that is the way that you place your camera. So you always want to be facing the sunlight, right? You don't want a situation where you're having like weird shadows to the side or to the left. And so when the source of light is sort of right in front of you, you always have the clearest picture of yourself. And I guess rule of thumb is to look directly at the camera, because sometimes, if depending on the level of the camera, you could be looking behind it, you could be looking ahead of it, you could be looking around it. But if you're looking straight at the camera, like right now, I'm looking straight at the camera of my laptop, so it looks like I'm looking straight. Whereas if I look down to read, the comments or to look at people's hands, I'm no longer looking at the camera anymore. So my, that kind of throws that out. And with knowing the angles, I mean, do you use social media very often? Like, do you take pictures on Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook often?
Yeah, I used to, but not anymore. I've not been doing that.
Because what happens, and I think most everybody who takes pictures, maybe most women will agree with me, is everybody actually has, a good side, or not necessarily a bad side, but like a better side, right? A side where like you sort of like the angle of your face better than the other angle.
Than the other, yeah.
Exactly, right. And sort of using that to determine where you place your cameras is always a good point, because you can just always be looking at the best side, or like you can always have your better looking side kind of being the focal point.
All right, thank you very much. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Okay,
You're welcome.
To add to what you were saying, even about content creating and recording, you said when you record, sometimes how when you're recording it reverses it. There's a way you can edit it, and you can switch it back so it will mirror your image, so that it looks exactly how you're sitting. I don't know if you know about that, Zainab.
No, I don't. And doesn't it depend on the type of phone you're using?
You can, there are editing apps you can actually use to do that as well.
Oh, really? I would like to know. Please, if you have, please share with me.
So I mean, I've put business groups, and we have one for Ghana and one for Nigeria. So if you join, and I'm one of the admins on there. So if you reach out to me, I'll definitely share with you. And then
I sent a request.
Okay, yes, please. And then the other thing about, sometimes I have to do like videos for the company. And one thing I've realized with the cards, I've tried the cards, it doesn't work for me. So I just like read maybe 2 or 3 lines. And I try and like memorize it. And you know, you also have to add emotion. You have to be excited when you're also speaking. So when I do that, I go and then I stop. Then I do the next scene. So I just do it small, and then I edit everything together and make it one video. So you don't have to memorize everything as well. So that's just my 2 cents to add to what Emma had said.
All right. Thank you, Renee. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Renee. You know social media better than me because I don't do that very
No,
often.
we all do, girl. We all do.
Okay. Florence, I see your hand is up. After Florence, then we'll do Queen and then Patricia.
Okay, thank you very much. Zainab was looking for a group to join. She should look for Toastmasters.
Yes, I was trying to remember Toastmasters. Thank you. Actually, thank you for bringing that up because I knew. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. And then the gentleman who wanted to change his accent, please, the audience will know that it is not you. Just be yourself. I once met a steward on the plane who was speaking like a white person. So I collected his contact to encourage him to join MC Ship and then get extra money. And he was speaking in his normal Ghanaian language. So it means that he's a fake. So when people get to know that that is not the way you normally talk, your credibility will be eroded. So please be yourself and let them know that that's you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Florence. Okay, Queen. Queen, are you there?
Hello, good afternoon, everybody.
Hi, afternoon.
Thank you very much for this information. Unfortunately, I didn't join in time. So I would really appreciate if I get the what's the name? The presentation after via WhatsApp.
Can we do that? Can we share the slides in the
So
WhatsApp?
Queen, we shared within the group. So we have one for Ghana and Nigeria. It's in the chat. I don't know if you've seen it, but I'll repost it again.
Apparently, I'm not on any of the groups.
Yes, please.
This
So
is my first time joining you.
Oh,
There's
nice.
a link in the chat for you to join the WhatsApp groups. So if you join, then the presentation is there.
Yes, please.
Okay, but unfortunately, I'm doing the Zoom on my laptop.
Your laptop, okay.
Anyways.
All right.
Can I go on?
Yes, please. Can you?
Okay. Apparently, I am a media marketer. I've been doing it for a while. At a point in time, some of my friends told me to venture into a movie or a TV presentation. I didn't train for any of that, but apparently I was able to do it because it was very fluent. I was very okay with it. When I was in school, I was with a drama group, and then eventually after school, we're doing presentations with our alma maters, going to school to talk to them and all that. So I built up the speaking experience from that. After that, I've been joining presentations like this to polish up and then read a bit. So what I'm going to say to anybody is, it is okay to make mistakes. English is not our language. It's not our language. We make mistakes. Everybody is bound to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. And then 2, understand whatever topic you want to discuss. Understand what you want to say. Write just points down. If you understand whatever you want to discuss or teach people, just write the points down and elaborate whilst talking. The ideas comes naturally. You understand? And then thirdly, do lots of self-care reading, do self-care and then some affirmations to make yourself aware and believe in yourself that you are confident and you can do it. You understand? So when you get to the public too and you're about to speak, think in your mind, put it in your mind like you're talking to a friend, you're just having a chat with a friend. You understand? Don't be so serious about it. It's okay to make mistake. So that's the little I'd want to add. Aside that, I want to take presentation as a business, like take it as a career, doing presentation and MCing. I don't know how to start that. If you could help me on that as well.
So
And then another thing is I have ideas on lots of things. So if you give me could give me an idea on how to niche down on a particular way to go, because I have vast ideas of lots of things to do. So I just want to stream down and be on one side. You get where I'm coming from?
I actually don't. I'm trying to follow. So you mean, so like with regards to public speaking, you want to be able to focus on like a specific niche in public
Yes,
speaking?
a specific niche, yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think given your background in media marketing, I think a good place to look into would be sort of, I guess, like storytelling and helping people with, their brands. And storytelling from the point of view of like, and you see a little bit of this when you read through the presentation, right? Because the earlier parts of it talked a little bit more about the power of storytelling, right? So a lot of that is really focused on like how you create a framework of the information that you want to share and tailor it to the audience that you want to reach. I think that is a good place to start with regards to kind of building out a career in presentation. Look, if we want to be very honest, right, there's so many ways to do that, right? There's people who have gone ahead and studied this and made it their life mission to have every possible certificate about this. But then there's also people who have gotten really good at this from practice, right? A lot of influencers became influencers because they were consistent in kind of showing up and telling a story every day until enough people wanted to listen. And so there's no like one right way to go about, becoming kind of I don't want to use the word influencer, but like becoming personality like in this space or making this your career, because it really just sort of depends on what works for you, right? There's people who have studied their whole life and they aren't as big as people who have just been very consistent in building the habits of like content creation, for example, on Instagram. Right. So there's not a one size fits all sort of situation. But to Florence's point, right, like, and I was saying earlier that there are a lot of sort of professional public speaking groups to leverage, and Toastmasters is a really good one to use because they're sort of very global. I think there's a Toastmasters like or community in different states in Nigeria. There's one in Ghana. There might be multiple in Ghana. So that's like a really good network to leverage. And another thing that's helpful too is to find a mentor within the space, right? Look at, right, kind of build out, like vision board this for yourself. Like who are examples of people that you want to sort of mirror in this journey for yourself? Right. In those people, are there some that are within reasonable reach that you could reach out to and see, look, you've become a brand name in this, you've been so successful and I want to be able to learn from you. And building those kinds of connections, I think would be really helpful in helping you navigate this career path for yourself. Did this answer your question?
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Queen. All right, Patricia. And I think Patricia's the last. Okay, Patricia, you're up.
Hi.
Hello.
I want to find out how to control my pitch and tone.
Okay.
I also have this thing about memorization. Let's say you are pitching and you're in front of a panel.
Yeah.
you just have your slides, and slides have very small points, and you need to talk. How to talk without getting distracted. Sometimes, like, I don't know whether it's pressure or naturally the brain is not thinking right, and that's when you may start saying which is not really good. Apart from that, recently I had my elevator pitch, and my facilitator said, Patricia, next month build your confidence. But I'm naturally a slow talker. I'm naturally that's just my nature. So she doesn't know me, and I am like, I feel helpless. I don't know what to do.
And that's fine, right? We've been talking about how public speaking is not very different from having a conversation. And sometimes you get afraid to do it, and that's fine, but the key is always to push through the fear. So the first question of yours I'm going to address is, knowing how to kind of read the bullet points and present at the same time. So really, with like building presentations, the whole point is actually not for you to be reading word for word from, right, what you have written down in your presentation. And this is where, like, with specific, if you're working towards a specific presentation you have to give. And can I ask what is this presentation for? Patricia, are you there?
A business pitch.
Okay, a business pitch. Okay.
A business pitch or an academic presentation.
Okay. This is for school. So the bullet points in your presentation, in your deck, are really supposed to be there to help you kind of not ramble, right? It's a little risky to kind of just create the presentation and not have gone through the process of like actually practicing presenting it and then just waking up and then going to present it. Because if you do that, you're more likely to end up reading line for line, which is really not the point of what you're supposed to do, because everybody that's looking at the presentation can read what you've written. So you're not telling anybody, like, you're not building on what is already there. So a good rule of thumb of practice is, one, in your decks, your presentations or your slides shouldn't be convoluted with information. They should actually just be very simple bullet points that would help you remember what you need to talk about, right? And this has to go with you practicing presenting this. Like we've been saying since we started this Q&A, that practice really is the thing that makes you better, right? Because practicing also helps you feel like you're having more of a conversation as opposed to actually giving a presentation, right? So if you practice the slides enough times, right, you don't actually need the presentation. Like, you don't actually need it in front of you to be able to tell that story or to be able to give that pitch. It's just there for the other people to follow. And so to that point, one I would say is practicing every pitch that you're going to make before you do it, practicing enough times so it feels less like a presentation and more like a conversation. And two, using bullet points as opposed to really long sentences in the slides, and using bullet points that will help you remember things, right? So let me see if there's something in here I can use as an example. Okay, so let's use this slide, for example. If you notice, if you're here from the beginning, I use a lot of bullet points when I present because it helps me just remember the important points and I can talk about these important points, right? So each of these bullet points is giving you the core information you need to know, right? You need to provide tailored examples. You need to use visuals for impact, and you need to adapt the presentation style, right? All of this other information following each of these bullet points is for you to read through it, right? But because I've done, right, prior to coming to this meeting, I have practiced this, I can just look at the bullet points of use visuals for impact, and I know what this is referencing, and I know what to talk about without having to read it, right? So it's really supposed to be there as a guide for you to follow if you lose your way, but not for you to be reading it like line by line. And to the second point of practicing your pitch and your tone, I also hope, as was the case with Deji, that you aren't saying like what you're trying to do is not kind of change the accent with which you talk, because like you don't need to do that. And like Florence rightly pointed out, like that just shows a lack of authenticity. And when you sound really authentic, you've already lost your audience, right? So with your pitch and your tone, I mentioned earlier that something that helps me to control my cadence is to use my hands, right? Because it helps me to know kind of when to pause in a sentence, when to kind of speed up. So it feels like I'm having more of a natural conversation as opposed to just kind of speeding through things, right? And what you're trying to avoid, it sounds like, is, right, the nerves. You don't want to sound nervous as you're speaking. And honestly, it's okay to sound nervous as you're speaking, right? But that doesn't, it shouldn't distract from the content of the information that you are presenting. If what you're saying makes sense, and if the story is easy to follow and you're carrying people around, like people will excuse the fact that you sound nervous because like what you're seeing is engaging, right? With your tone and with your pitch, the one thing I would say is you can throw your voice without having to talk fast, right? You mentioned that you're a slow talker, which is fine. I think in some ways I'm also a slow talker. But one thing I try to do is be really loud in the way that I talk. So I would always imagine, like, it's helpful to think about, you know, if you were in a room that there wasn't any microphone and you needed somebody at the end of that room to hear you, right? You need to not necessarily shout, like throw your voice a little, just so that your voice can carry. I think that would help you with your pitch and with the enunciating. Like I was saying earlier, I think what has helped me is reading out loud. If you're in school meeting, you have a disposal of all kinds of textbooks, and it could be anything, right? It's just really building the habit of saying words out loud, whether you do that in the privacy of like you're in your room and you're lying down on your bed, or you're in the bathroom and you're practicing in the mirror. Just it helps sometimes to just like practice reading out loud in preparation for being able to speak out loud. Does that answer your question, or do those answer your questions? Patricia, are you there?
Yeah, yes, please.
Okay, guys, are there any final questions? It doesn't seem like they are. Before we wrap up, I would just like to thank my co-presenters, Florence and Queen, for chiming in, and Vinny as well for giving context where context was relevant. Okay, one more question from Deji.
Please, can I make a request, please, for how can I reach you, please? If I can make that request. Yes.
I can, are you in the WhatsApp group for Nigeria?
Yes, I just joined. It has not been approved.
I will also join, and I will send a message so anyone who needs me there can reach me from there.
All right, thank you so much.
No problem. All right, guys, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Winnie, I'm handing over to you. I'm also going to stop my share.
Thank you so much, Emma. That was amazing. Guys, if you can kindly share some emojis to show her how much you appreciate the session and really learned a lot. Before we leave, we have to do this because, I mean, this is an Oze workshop. So I'm going to invite my colleague just to tell you a bit more about Oze and see if it's something that you would be interested in. We know we have a very valuable and user-friendly application that most of our business owners enjoy using. So Isaac, over to you. If you can kindly just share something brief about what we do.
Thanks, Winnie. Thank you, Manuela, for the insightful session. Hi, everyone. My name is Isaac from the customer service team. Thanks for making time to join this workshop. I am here to introduce the Oze Business App to you. If you run a business and I ask you how much profit your business made last week or last year, would you be able to tell me? If you had the opportunity to also get a grant and you ask for a profit and loss report, how easily can you prepare that? If you've used the weighing scale before, when you stand on a weighing scale, you see the number, it tells you your weight, and then you decide on what to do, whether you eat well or you exercise more. That is how you're supposed to treat our business from day to day. Put a business on a scale and know whether your business is gaining weight or your business is losing weight. So what can you do with the Oze app? Oze combines your calculator, your receipts book, and your sales book into a simple software on your mobile phone, and you get to use it on your computer as well. What else can you do? Record sales and expenses, share receipts and invoices, remind your debtors to complete payments through a quick reminder. You can also download the reports and then also monitor your stock in your inventory. The latest addition is to list your products and services on an Oze shop where your customers can buy from you or order your services online through a customized website. So I'm here to encourage you to do business better by visiting the Google Play Store or Apple App Store on your iOS device to download Oze. So the name is Oze. You type OZE, it pops up, and then you download. The link is in the chat, so you can click and then download it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isaac, and thank you everyone for taking time. We usually do our workshops every month, the last Wednesday of every month. So we're hopeful that maybe you can even give us some suggestions on what you'd like us to talk or discuss in our business group. I've learned a lot. I know public speaking has also been a bit difficult for me, but I honestly feel like with the practice, it does make a huge difference. And trying to be also prepared, make sure you know what you're going to talk about, and you don't have to answer all the questions. You might not have the answers to all the questions, but be extremely prepared. So thank you so much, Emma, for another informative session. I'll see you guys next week. Oh, so I said next week, sorry, next month, and have a wonderful week, and thank you for joining. Bye-bye.